Hi, everyone. My name is Peyton Midtune. I am the Emergency Management Coordinator at Volunteer Florida. Um, Today, we are going to be talking about the Florida Disaster Fund grant for the Hurricane Helene and/or Hurricane Milton Recovery Grant. So this is the technical assistance call. Today, we're going to be talking more specifically about the grant itself. If you have any specific financial questions, there is going to be a separate webinar related to the financial technical assistance. Can you click on the PowerPoint?
Just take the key.
Alrighty, so some tips for participating. If you can all keep your mics muted, please. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat box, or we will have a short question and answer session at the end. You can save your questions for then. The recording for this webinar will be available on our website after today. So for the Florida Disaster Fund, the Florida Disaster Fund falls under the Volunteer Florida Foundation. The FDF is a grant opportunity to qualifying organizations that meet disaster cause needs in Florida with a focus on support for disaster response and long-term recovery activities. The Volunteer Florida Foundation is seeking to provide financial assistance to organizations supporting needs within a community impacted by disaster. The grant period for this grant is 12 months. It'll begin December 1st and go until November 30th of next year. Volunteer Florida will make available approximately $4.4 million for subgrantees serving the needs of Floridians impacted by Hurricane Helene and/or Hurricane Milton in counties that received a federal declaration for individual assistance. Funding priorities. Stronger applicants are going to demonstrate a high cost efficiency. It's going to show a high level of partnership activities. Projects that meet the needs that are not covered through other sources. That includes FEMA public assistance, hazard mitigation grants, community development block grants, disaster recovery programs, private insurances, or other state disaster recovery funds. It's going to demonstrate an integration of volunteers. Priority will be given to projects that can be initiated within 30 days and either be completed or demonstrate a measurable impact within the first 12 months. And preference will be given to projects that support Hurricane Helene. Do you think we skipped a page? Eligibility. All right, so organizations are eligible to apply for this Florida Disaster Fund grant if they are providing disaster recovery assistance and services in the geography specified by the disaster declarations for Hurricane Helene and/or Milton. Counties must have received a federal declaration for individual assistance. The organizations need to be classified by the IRS as a tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit, a long-term recovery group, faith-based or community organization, a municipality or local government acting as a fiscal agent, or have an organization making use of a fiscal agent that has some kind of designation as listed above. The organization needs to be serving clients that meet eligibility criteria through proof of disaster-related needs caused by Hurricane Helene and/or Milton. That would include proof of residency and ownership of any disaster damaged dwelling, income, insurance payment statements, documentation through local information sharing systems of all resources provided for disaster assistance. They should be willing to sign all required agreements for the release of information and data sharing, and they do need to be a legal resident of the United States. Organizations need to propose a project that clearly addresses disaster recovery needs resulting from Hurricane Helene and/or Milton. Projects may include, but are not limited to, home repair, reconstruction, volunteer coordination, unmet needs assistance, community-based recovery initiatives such as neighborhood cleanups and rebuilding community facilities, and other services that support survivor and community recovery. Projects must demonstrate measurable outcomes and coordination with local recovery partners. For eligibility, organizations also need to have a system in place for utilizing and supporting volunteers, and they need to complete an online application. Now, previous grantee recipients are eligible to apply if they have completed all closeout paperwork on previous grants. Current grant recipients are eligible to apply as long as they have expended at least 75% of funds from previous grant awards prior to submitting a subsequent application. Current and previous grantees are required to have maintained compliance through the timely submission of all required reports. All right, so for the review of the application, the review will be done in 3 stages. Each complete application will be evaluated and acted upon in a multi-stage process, balancing timeliness and with the fiduciary responsibilities. Stage 1 involves a staff review and preparation. Stage 2 involves an evaluation by members of our foundation's advisory committee, who will score and forward qualifying applications for aggregation and review. And then finally, the final determination of award recipients and award amounts are going to be made by the foundation's executive committee and the foundation board. Fatal criteria for this grant. Proposals will not be reviewed for funding unless all of the following criteria are met. The proposal needs to be submitted through our Blackbaud online portal and received by the Volunteer Florida Foundation no later than October 28th at 5 p.m. Proposals will not be accepted via email or hard copy. Your proposals need to be the completed application. They need to provide supporting documentation like the project budget, agreement and certification form, board of directors list, an IRS determination letter, 2 of the most recent financial statements or audits, your organization's annual budget, a W-9, and the banking details on Volunteer Florida Foundation's electronic financial transfer form. Now, documents the link to any of those forms that we have the templates for can be found in the application. I will tell you sometimes Blackbaud does get a little buggy when it comes to the URL links. So if you are seeing a URL and it's telling you that it's unsafe, it is a direct link. It is totally fine. You can just delete the unsafe part of the URL and the form will appear. Applicants who do not include all of the supporting documentation will not be considered for funding. All right, so for the budget, this is going to be a bit of an overview. Again, there is a separate financial technical assistance call where any specific questions related to budget can be asked at that point. But generally speaking, funds awarded to subgrantees are intended to be used for disaster recovery efforts for communities impacted by Hurricane Helene and/or Hurricane Milton, and they need to have received a federal declaration for individual assistance. The minimum grant request, not including match, is $100,000, and the maximum request is $500,000. Grantees are required to provide a 50% in-kind and/or cash match. The use of volunteers can be used towards your match. Volunteer hours are currently valued at $33 an hour. These grants are cost reimbursement only. Grantees may submit an advanced payment request. Advanced payments cannot exceed more than 20% of the award. After the initial advance, remaining payments will need to be made at cost reimbursement basis. No advance payments or monthly reimbursements can be processed without an approved budget in place. Administrative costs must be limited to 10% of the total budget. FDF grant money can be used to support a salaried position, but that does fall under administrative costs. So if you are expecting to hire a separate role for this grant, that is maxed at that 10% of the entire grant. Other requirements, quarterly reporting. Successful subgrantees will report to Volunteer Florida Foundation on a quarterly basis through Blackbaud. Performance measures should include a number of volunteer hours, service or hours served, survivors assisted. We want you to be able to tell us the good work you are doing. We are looking for anecdotal evidence, testimonials. We want to see pictures. We want to see the success that you guys are putting into these programs. This grant will the reporting will also ask for a spending breakdown between each event within these quarterly reports. Financial reporting, successful subgrantees will report to the Volunteer Florida Foundation on a monthly basis with submission of a Volunteer Florida monthly invoice and appropriate supporting documentation of expenditures and match. After submission of an invoice, Volunteer Florida has 45 days to reimburse. Awarded grantees will be required to attend a periodic expenditure and laserfish training at the beginning of the contract year. All right, for the timeline, so as you have seen, hopefully, the application opened the end of last month on the 26th. Today is that application technical assistance call. Next Wednesday is the budget technical assistance call. That is at 3 p.m. That is going to be led by our Deputy Finance Director, and she'll be able to answer more specific finance and budget-related questions. That grant application does close October 28th at 5 p.m. That is that hard deadline. The grant application will not be accepted. It will not let you submit the grant after 5 p.m. The anticipated award announcement will be November 12th. Budget clarification and approval period is the 12th through November 21st. And then the anticipated contract period is that December 1st through November 30th. Again, that financial technical assistance webinar will be October 15th. That's next Wednesday. This is especially important for anybody who has never written a Volunteer Florida Foundation budget before, or those that have not gone through a Volunteer Florida Foundation clarification period. For these calls, registration is not required and they can be accessed through the Microsoft Teams link in the NOFO or on the Volunteer Florida website. All right, so we're going to go over some of the questions and answers that we have received prior to today's call. And then after we get through these, we'll open up the floor if there are any additional questions. But what kind of work is eligible for reimbursement through this grant? Allowable activities include, but are not limited to, cleanup, home repair and rebuilding, replacement of household goods, office supplies, staffing, which is again limited to that 10% administrative costs, volunteer support, and community projects. Reimbursement will be limited to expenses in the program budget approved by Volunteer Florida Foundation. So once that budget is approved, that's the work we're expecting to see. Who is eligible to receive assistance and what kind of documentation may be needed to confirm eligibility? Individuals are eligible to receive assistance if their primary residence is within an impacted county that received a federal declaration for individual assistance or IA. Projects must meet needs not covered through other sources. Again, that's the FEMA public assistance, hazard mitigation, community block grants, insurance, other disaster recovery funds. The grants may only be used to support recovery specific to the event of the application, and the support must be related to the impact of the event. This is not a capacity building grant. This is a recovery grant. Can this grant be used to fund a full-time staff position or program manager grant manager role? Again, this grant allows for a maximum of the 10% administrative costs. Administrative costs can be used to fund a salaried position, but it is capped at that administrative cost. What documents are required to prove eligibility? Serving clients that meet eligibility criteria for proof of disaster-related needs caused by Helene and Milton. That includes that proof of residency and ownership of any disaster-damaged dwelling, income, insurance payment statements, documentation through a local information sharing system, and all of the resources provided for disaster assistance, the willingness to sign all required agreements for that release of information and data sharing, and again, that legal residency of the United States. Information sharing may be required as needed. Who is responsible for the cost share? The recipient of this grant would be responsible for the match. The recipient will have to determine on the budget how they plan on meeting that match. With the 75% spend down requirement for other Florida Disaster Fund grants, do the funds have to be completely expensed or can the funds be allocated to qualify? This is for any current grantees that hold a Florida Disaster Fund grant already, if they are currently holding Florida Disaster Fund dollars. 75% needs to be completely expensed out, not just allocated, but fully expensed, and monthly reporting needs to confirm that. What can be used to meet match requirement? Grant match can be met by a dollar per dollar match or through the use of in-kind donations and volunteer hours. Dollars from other Florida Disaster Fund grants or funding sources may not be used to meet match. Grant dollars from other sources will require a letter of approval to be used as match. Paid staff can be used as match as long as the work completed during the time allocated to the match is specifically tied to the recovery projects worked. Time cards may be required as proof of staff hours. And paid staff members match is capped at that 10% administrative cap for the grant. Volunteer hours to meet match are only eligible during that grant period. Can those funds be used to rebuild repair damages to community buildings such as condos and apartments or public facilities? Community buildings and public facilities will still have to meet the eligibility requirements set forth in the NOFO. Community buildings should have been eligible for public assistance or insurance assistance. The funds cannot be used when other services should have been used first. These funds are meant to help and support filling gaps. These funds cannot be used to improve projects and can only be used to repair damages caused by Helene and/or Milton. Can this grant be sub-granted out to additional entities? No. Grants cannot be sub-granted out to additional entities. Grant recipients may partner with other entities to complete projects, but the grant recipient remains responsible for the match, the reimbursement, and reporting. All right, so that was a lot of information. We
One question in the chat.
can pull up the chat.
And I sent it to you, stress.
It's gonna, right there from Michelle.
A municipality or local government acting as a fiscal agent, does that mean that a county can only apply for a nonprofit, etc., in the capacity of a fiscal agent, or can a local government apply outright for funding?
So you addressed it in the condo.
Yeah, so again, it would really be if eligibility is met based on your project itself. So if a county is applying for a community project like a utility, it needed to confirm that the other eligibility requirements were already met. So it would truly depend on the project itself, not necessarily on who is applying.
So a municipality or a local government is eligible to apply, but again, as to Peyton's point, if it is to repair a community or a county municipality building that was impacted, you need to ensure that all insurance premiums have been met, that all PA or other FEMA financial assistance has been met. And again, it can be as that gap filler.
Thank you.
See Rachel's question.
Rachel, your question is if we can give an example of what we mean by local information sharing system. Do you mind expanding on that question for me?
Yep, sorry, finding my microphone. Yes, in the eligible applicants section C about eligibility requirement for the clients, it says documentate that if proof of residency and documentation through a local information sharing system of all resources provided for disaster assistance. Is there some local information sharing system that I should know about that is consistent throughout Florida or throughout these counties, or are we talking about an LTRG or the disaster case management that the homeowner has been using?
Yeah, there is no standardized local information sharing agreement. Now, your point, you should work with the case management and the long-term recovery group, and some long-term recovery groups at the local level have established one. And of course, we don't want to share client information without having that permission, which I know all of us on this call are aware of, but we don't share that information without that. And then as far as the requirements to as needed share it with Volunteer Florida, that is just as needed, audit purposes, etc. Michelle, I do see your follow-up question there, and I'm gonna circle back with you on that, if that's all right. And when we publish this with the questions written out, we'll have the answer to that.
Can I follow up on something you just said about the release of information? Are those documents, the signing these required agreements for release of information, you're saying those are something that has to happen, and the documents will be provided by Volunteer Florida?
No, we have no standard documents for that. Most nonprofits have their own release of information form. If you're going to share information of the clients, you just need to ensure that you have that. It isn't a requirement per se of this grant.
It is not a requirement of the grant. Okay. And then what documentation are you looking for the legal residency proof?
Proof of home ownership, proof of residency.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Do we have any other questions? If you can raise your hand if you have any additional questions.
Correct. This cannot be used to recover expenditures that have already been spent for, even if it was for repair efforts for Hurricanes Helene and Milton.
Do we have any other questions?
Dan asked if the slide deck will be available.
Mhm.
Yes, the slide deck will be included within the recorded of the webinar.
I will just add one note. We briefly mentioned Blackbaud, and Peyton mentioned that sometimes there can be a little bit of challenges. And if you run into that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we can guide you and walk you through that. But that system is the only way that we are going to accept applications, and it does automatically shut off at 5 p.m. So you will not be able to submit after that 5 p.m. time.
Yes, and I will also expand on that. This is a new portal, so if you've previously had a grant with Volunteer Florida, other than within the last 6 months, you will need to create a new account. Create an account, you will need to match yourself to an organization. And then when the application is completed, you can provide more details in it as well. But a new account will need to be created. Blackbaud will allow you to add multiple users to the same application, so you can have multiple people working on it as needed. And then you can also share it as needed out if you require separate approvals within your organization. So Christine asked, are you looking to prioritize Hurricane Helene damage or both Helene Milton? At this point, we are prioritizing Helene projects, whether that's completed as a Helene application or as a combined application, will depend on the project itself or on the application. So we would need you to provide more information on your application itself. We are prioritizing Helene work.
We would like to see projects for everything, for
Yes.
either Helene and Milton combined, just Helene or just Milton. We have a tiny bit more money for Helene, specifically for Helene. So on your application, if your project is specifically Helene, we would like you to notate that, but you are not going to be ineligible or disqualified if you only have a combined project. Please submit all projects that you have.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions? Is there anything that was in the chat that we might have missed? All right, if we are not hearing any other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up this call. Again, the recording of this webinar, including the presentation, will be made available through the Volunteer Florida website. If there's nothing else, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.